people are so resistant to this. I ran into a lady in the elevator on my way down here that was saying, I heard there's some kind of a conference going on here. And I go, yeah, a UFO conference. She goes, you don't believe that stuff, do you? And I go, yeah, I do. I said, you know that movie Fire in the Sky? That's me. And she just laughed.
You guys ready for an awesome night?
Yeah.
Yes. Now, this first speaker, I'm sure you don't really need an introduction because he's probably one of the most famous abductees of all time. The biggest movie on alien abduction was based on Travis Walton. So without further ado, let's introduce Mr. Travis Walton. Give him a round of applause, everybody.
Thank you.
Now, the movie itself told the story. Of course, there were some alterations to it, but nonetheless, a lot of people have already heard it, but I think we should just go revisit it again. Let's take us back to November 5th, 1975.
Well, you know, it was an ordinary work day for 7 crewmen working out in the woods, and so we saw this glow coming through the trees, and we knew it was something out of the ordinary right away, because, you know, it's nighttime in the woods. Generally, it's just black out there, and, you know, you might see an occasional wild animal, but you know, here was this, these glimmer of lights coming through the trees. And because it was deer hunting season, we thought maybe it was hunters camped up there. But, you know, it just wasn't fitting in. The light was coming from higher than where ground level would have been. There was a thicket of trees between us and where it was. So when we finally got up to where you could see the source of the light, it was just the biggest shock. I mean, you know, Alan Dallas in the upper right here, yelled out, "It's a flying saucer." I mean, it was so absolutely unmistakable that everybody knew what it was immediately. You know, the skeptics were trying to say, oh, it was the planet Jupiter or something. And it was just totally absurd. Another guy was trying to claim it was Air Force helicopters. This was less than between here and the back of the room, and there was just no mistaking it. We were just awestruck. John, you know, and some of the others actually called it beautiful, which kind of a strange reaction, you know, but it was so perfect and so imposing, the power, not just visually, but the sound it was making. It was just incredible. It was as smooth as glass. Parts of it were dark, metallic, and parts of it were glowing, this golden glow. But I just, you know, for some reason thought it would take off immediately. And I just jumped out of the truck and headed towards it. And the closer I got, the more alarmed the crew was. You know, they were screaming at me and yelling at me to get away from there. And I slowed down because I was starting to realize how this impulse wasn't what I thought it was. So I thought it would take off before I got that close. So when I got up to where I was looking up at about a 45-degree angle, I was just mesmerized by the power of the sound. There was a deep, deep rumble that you could actually feel in your body, aside from the, you know, coming through the ears. And even the guys in the truck said they could feel the vibration in the truck. But there were high points that just, you know, how when you're listening to a really high-pitched sound, how it kind of changes a little bit when you change your position of your head. It was kind of like off the range of human hearing on the low end and the high end. But it suddenly got louder. So I jumped down into a crouch behind a log that was sticking up there. And they were screaming at me, swearing at me to get back in the truck and run back. So I didn't need to be told. I realized then what a scary situation it was. And so I stood up to run back, and when I did, bam, that's when it hit me. This blast of energy came out of the bottom of the craft, And I just felt this stunning sort of, it was like a physical blow almost, but it felt a lot like an electrical shock. And one of the crewmen in the back, Dwayne Smith, said that it sounded to him like high voltage. He later became an electrician, journeyman electrician on industrial applications. And he said that when those big switches closed, that surge of power, it sounded that way to him, which is, it's impossible to describe, but it threw me through the air, they say 10 or 20 feet. And immediately they were screaming at each other, it killed him, he's dead. It was that violent. Now, for some reason the director chose to kind of play that down in the movie, which is an unexpected thing for Hollywood. You'd expect anytime they have a chance for a light show, they're going to really blow it up. But it was actually far more violent and far more powerful than it was depicted in the movie. Ken Peterson said that when they were returning, see, they'd had this argument up the road whether it actually blown me to bits, whether I was incinerated or disintegrated. And Ken said that because they'd seen it take off as they were coming back, his thought was, what's his body going to look like? That was the scariest thing to him. He thought it was going to be horrible, just charred.
Well, they left at this point.
Yeah.
Right?
So they took off and they went and reported to the sheriff. The sheriff, could see they were incredibly upset, but he suspected them of murdering me and making up this crazy cover story. So after a 5-day manhunt with men on horseback, dozens of men combing the area, helicopters and horseback, and they had the tracking dogs from the local prison. And so they called in the state police lie detector expert. And when the men passed the polygraphs, they were really stumped because they thought they were going to explain it away as a tall tale to cover up a murder. But it never went away after that. It was just a long series of accusations. Well, that doesn't work, so we'll think of something else to explain it away. And people who really want to not believe something, you don't have to hand them very much before they'll say, oh yeah, fine, like in the case of Roswell, people are really going to believe that the U.S. military is going to mistake a balloon for a crashed sauce. But a lot of people to this day say, oh yeah, it was really just a mistake about some tinfoil and sticks,
What I think is scariest about this is they were more readily acceptable. It was more acceptable for them that they had murdered you than that you have been hit by an unidentified flying object.
Yeah, and ironically, the converse, had this been a murder, and if they had testified that they'd seen a murder without polygraph tests, no problem. Whoever they said did it, he's going to jail, no doubt. But when it's a UFO, even with the polygraph test, suddenly they're going, I'm thinking of every other alternative explanation. And it was just one long battle over the years of fighting back about all these ridiculous allegations. And they were ridiculous. The idea that it was a transitory psychosis, that I temporarily went insane. Well, I had a whole battery of psychiatric tests that undercut that theory, but what was really dumb from the start was, how do 7 people have the same psychosis? It's just grab onto anything if it'll explain it away. The drug hallucination theory, the same thing. Even though I had blood tests proved there was no drugs of any kind in my body, how do you explain 7 people having the same hallucination?
Can't. And I think that's a BS statement to say that mass hallucination. What are 7 people going to have the exact same idea of what happened and independently make it up in their mind? It just doesn't make sense. Going back to the actual time when you were hit by this beam, did you think that the extraterrestrials in this craft were maliciously hitting you with this beam?
Well, at the time, when I regained consciousness, I thought it was a life-threatening situation. The pain I was feeling and the feeling of suffocation. And I really, have to amplify that. There was one thing in the abduction sequence in the movie that, even though it was fiction, did a better job of communicating to the audience the feeling that of total fear that the feeling of suffocation will give you. when the actor's held down on the table, the aliens are surrounding him, and there's this membrane over his face, and he's struggling to scream through it and struggling to breathe through it. That didn't really happen, but you know, if you showed an actor just breathing hard and looking panicked, you wouldn't really get it. The feeling of suffocation is, I think, was the over-the-top element there that led to me being totally hysterical the whole time I was conscious. The fact that I was in pain, that I was in this dimly lit, claustrophobic little space, surrounded by these incredibly strange beings, which, you know, didn't seem sympathetic to me at all. You know, it was a very threatening situation. And the feeling that I couldn't move, I was so weak, I could hardly move. All of those things are nothing compared to the feeling of suffocation. And I draw the comparison between waterboarding and what I was experiencing. Even though the terrorists know about this technique, they even train for it, practice it, it still works because you cannot reason away the fear that suffocation and the feeling of lack of oxygen gives you. So a lot of people say, well, if that happened to me, I would stay cool and ask good questions and take souvenirs, you know. But the way it happened for me, you know, one of the guys on the crew was so mad at me relating that when they went to the sheriff, he was still crying. Then he came over to my house and he wanted to fight. You know, he acted like the fact that this was had such a powerful effect on all of us was somehow, you know, that he wasn't man enough. But it's just a testimony to the power of what we experienced. And so, you know, there's, you know, everybody cried, you know, and I'm not ashamed to say that.
The beings that you saw, which you just had a picture, a drawing, an artist rendition of them, is very similar in description to what a lot of people consider the Greys, yet yours actually had pupils and they weren't just necessarily black eyes. Do you have a theory on why that's the case, or do you think it's another species?
You know, I think that a lot of what people are calling the Greys are really a multitude of different species. I think that just the way life comes about on Earth, that you will see many species that are very, very similar in appearance because they live in similar environments, but they're not even genetically related at all. One didn't come from the other. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's far more species out there than people are allowing for. And you know, we have a tendency to do that. You know, all those people over there, they all look alike. You know, it's just a stupid cliche. We're not familiar with the things that make them unique to each other, and so we think they look alike. But you know, it's the same thing with the Greys and the other species. I think there's innumerable and come and go.
Now, another set of species you saw when you were on the craft, once you sort of chased these Greys away, was human-looking extraterrestrials.
Yeah, human-looking, and I still don't you know, I thought at first, when I first saw them, that this was some human-based agency that was there to rescue me from these horrible creatures, but I really now think that they were probably non-human, but just happened to look one heck of a lot like us.
They were wearing helmets. Do you think the reason why you had a hard time breathing on their ship was because you didn't have the necessarily helmet that they did?
Yeah, I at first thought maybe it was like bacterial contamination or stuff, but it was probably the atmosphere just wasn't right for humans or even human-like beings.
Now, after 40 years of you talking about the event, speaking about it, you've sort of changed your theory on why they took you, right?
Yeah, I have. And, you know, it's been a long, slow evolution because the fear that accompanied all these memories was so powerfully tied to that even when I talk about it now, there's still a lot of that fear. But once I really came to the idea that, you know, they probably took me aboard to revive me, that blast of energy, whether it was deliberate and unintentionally powerful, but more likely some sort of a side effect of the propulsion system, that I was unintentionally injured, maybe killed, and that they were forced to take me aboard to make some repairs. And it took 5 days.
A lot of people who are taken multiple times throughout their lives. I'm sure a lot of people had the same question about you. Was this just an isolated incident, or have you ever been taken prior to or after that?
Well, you know, I'm often asked that question. I often say I wouldn't tell anybody if I did. But there was an incident when I was a kid where there was this little bald-headed guy that was dragging me away in the middle of the night. And I told my family about it, and I spent days looking for where this thing escaped to. And they all laugh about it to this day. But whether that was just a really vivid dream or not, I don't know. But I'll fess up to that since my family knows about that one.
Now, the reason why I actually think that they were not looking to harm you is because rather than dumping you back in the middle of the forest where it was isolated, no one would find you, they left you on the side of a road near a phone.
Yeah, if I had been put back where it happened, I would have froze to death. It was getting down to about 8 degrees, and you know, it would have been extremely hazardous. But you know, people would wonder, well, why wouldn't they leave me in Snowflake, where I live? But Snowflake is in this big, wide, low valley where if they had put me down any place close enough to where I could get help, they would have been seen by hundreds of people. But Heber, the town nearest where it happened, is in these steep canyons that converge there. And they were able to, once they were below treetop level, they would be invisible in any direction. So they would be able to see that I got help or got to where I could get help.
Now, you were gone for 5 days. The conscious memory you have of the encounter, if you were to estimate the time that you remember, how long did you think you were gone for?
Somewhere around an hour, maybe you could count it in minutes, I don't know. But there are little glimmers of memory that come back that have been blocked. The hypnotist determined that there were blocked memories. Now, how much of that other time I was in a coma or unconscious or dead or whatever, I don't know. But I think there were other memories that I just can't get at.
Now, obviously, because you've been speaking about this for 40 years and you've been exposed, a lot of people have come to you telling you their stories. I'm sure at this point you've created or thought of some theories of why people are being taken. What do you think is happening worldwide?
Well, you know, people refer to the alien agenda in the singular, and I think that it should be plural because there's probably almost as many agendas as there are species. Now, we've got the Hubble telescope up there, and they've already identified dozens of planets near enough for us to see that they're there and, you know, that they're at the proper distance from their star that are possibly Earth-like. And so, you know, NASA has, you know, taken the next step and said that within the Milky Way galaxy, this galaxy, that there are more Earth-like planets than there are stars. And not only are planets not rare, that probably every star has about a dozen planets. So that's a huge amount of possible sources for these beings. And one point that Michio Kaku, the physicist, makes is that stop imagining them as being a few hundred years ahead of us, because some of these star systems are hundreds of thousands or millions of years ahead of us. And, you know, like Arthur C. Clarke said, a technology sufficiently advanced would be indistinguishable from magic. But also you got to consider the relative distance time-wise between some of these species. Some of them may be only 1,000 years ahead of us, while others are 1,000,000 years ahead of us, because there's every age of star system out there. So it really complicates the picture.
And what about those that are 5 billion years ahead of us, you know, or beyond? Because
wow, yeah.
if the Earth is only 4.5 billion years old and the universe is supposedly, 14 billion approximately. Anyhow, with that being said, when you talked about the planets, the Earth-like planets, I think to date they said something approximately 5,000 that are Earth-like, not too far from the sun, not too close. The problem is we're carbon-based. Who's to say that these other extraterrestrials are also carbon-based? So if you expand that notion to, say, silicone-based, then there's a lot more planets that you have to factor in.
Well, that's true, but without even going that far, the conditions for life exist in the billions in our near neighborhood. And many of those points of light that we see in the night sky are entire galaxies, just like this Milky Way of 20 billion stars. So if they can traverse those kinds of distances, then the number becomes unimaginable.
Now, you just mentioned alien agendas. I wholeheartedly agree with you. It can't just be one agenda, especially if there's so many different species visiting us. Have you formulated any of your own opinions of speculation-wise of what some of these agendas may be?
Well, I would speculate that intelligent life is going to be interested in intelligent life. And the ones that are more humanoid, and I'm not talking just about the human-looking species, I'm talking about even what they call grays, are going to be more interested in us just because of our similarity to them. And, who knows what sort of learning can go on the more you pursue it. And I do think that there's something else that a lot of people aren't realizing. They say, especially the skeptics, well, if this was true, they would land on the White House lawn and say, we're here we are, and it would be all open about it. And that's obviously not happening. And then some people say, well, it's just because they'd be met with missiles and fighter planes. But I think aside from that, there's another reason. And I was talking about, this sufficiently advanced technology. With their technology, they would be capable of doing everything they're doing here and remaining completely undetected. And they're not doing that either. So why is it not open contact, and why is it not completely clandestine? And I really do think the reason is for our benefit. I really do think that Gene Roddenberry came up with a basic principle, the non-interference, the prime directive, that to intervene, to infuse technology especially, would be extremely destructive. Now, everybody in this room would probably go about their business tomorrow if such an open contact were made. But most of the world wouldn't even go to work tomorrow, and it would be, that wars would be fought, and, suicides, just remember the War of the Worlds, people were, going to extreme measures. So I really do think that that's the case. If the NSA knows where every cell phone camera is, certainly the aliens with their technology can avoid the cameras when they want, or even alter what's in them when they choose. So it's a measured amount of exposure, just enough to condition us to this, to where it sort of seeps into the culture without overwhelming us.
All right, everybody, we'll be right back with more with Travis Walton. Okay, now we are back with Travis Walton. Round of applause, everybody. Yes. It seems to me that we're at a serious tipping point. Non-stop wars, famine, poverty, yet we have billionaires that have so much wealth that they don't know what to do with it. At the same time, we have a rash of sightings. It seems to me that we have more sightings in the last 60, 70 years than probably in the centuries leading up to before. Do you think we're at some sort of tipping point right now?
I've long thought that something's about to happen, and likely within our lifetimes.
In 1975, when this first happened, obviously no one believed you. They wanted to think you were murdered. It was easier to accept murder than, a flying saucer took them. But more and more people are starting to accept this. As a matter of fact, anybody who's 18 or younger was born after extraterrestrial planets were found. How has the reaction of people changed since 1975?
Good point, and this ties right in with what I was saying about it's necessary to be incremental with people's acknowledgement of this. Like, for instance, this evidence pictured here with the accelerated tree growth of the trees nearest where the craft came down. That only became evident 15 years after the incident. And here, just this last summer, we discovered that this phenomenal growth factor was only on the side of the tree in the direction that the craft was. From the north side, it was the south end. From the south side, it was the north side of the tree. Same thing with east and west. So there was a directional effect to this accelerated growth. And that's, pretty recent, ongoing discoveries that are being made in connection with my incident. And in a broader sense, I talked about the Hubble telescope, and it's just kind of trickling out there. Even the old facts of my case are still reaching farther and farther afield. And, I've got friend requests this year from Hungary and Tanzania and Moldova and places I never heard of, but it's bigger than when it first happened. And it's because people are so resistant to this. I ran into a lady in the elevator on my way down here that was saying, I heard there's some kind of a conference going on here. And I go, yeah, a UFO conference. She goes, you don't believe that stuff, do you? And I go, yeah, I do. I said, that movie Fire in the Sky, that's me. And she just laughed, So, that's still out there.
Yes.
But at the same time, when I go downtown now, the reaction is completely different. People say, hello, Travis, like we're old friends. And sometimes, even though I live in the same town, I don't know who they are. But, it's the attitude and the willingness. People come up, shake my hand and say, I've always supported you. They didn't want to say so publicly before, but now they do. So, it's really changed in many ways. I think people are more and more ready, and the incrementalism, the process, it's working.
In the early days of the alien abduction phenomenon, when very few people actually believed it, you were one of the ones that put it on the map, per se. So many people have been inspired because ever since you spoke, then they realized that, hey, maybe I could speak because I'm not alone. What do you have to say to all the people out there who have still yet to share their experiences and are still suffering through this trauma?
Well, I have to, try to put myself in the shoes of the person who doesn't know anything about this and is probably somewhat skeptical. And so, with our next speaker, the idea that, sure, this might be true, what you're saying, but how do you know that? And there's things that I could report that I don't because I can't prove it. And there's some things that I didn't report until I could prove it. And so I've always gone on the basis of evidence as much as possible, because that's what they need. There's a responsibility to trying to present the most credible, logical basis for this. And, I kind of take exception to the term paranormal, because this is normal.
That's right.
And I've come to the trying to put forth the position, and the entire UFO community need to really push the idea that we're not the kooks. The ones who think we're alone in the universe, that's what's kooky. I mean, with the evidence we have now, the shoe's on the other foot. They are in the position of making a claim for which there's no rational basis and runs contrary to tons of evidence.
To believe we are alone is probably literally the height of human arrogance. Just to be so vain to think that of all those planets and star systems that they can't harbor life, I just think it boggles my mind. What is next for you? How do you see yourself 5 years down the line, 10 years, 15 years down the line, and the topic of ufology and alien abduction as a whole?
Well, there have been times where I just got so fed up, I quit talking about it for a number of years. The film scriptwriter Tracy Torme kind of drew me out from one of my withdrawals from public speaking. But, gradually, I've realized that along with the burden comes a huge responsibility. And I think it does help, in the end game to get out there, keep speaking the truth, pointing to the evidence, and presenting a case based on evidence to sort of set the bar for other reports. Now, I'm not saying that if you can't prove what happened to you that, you know, you're not telling the truth. It's not the case at all. But I'm just saying, as far as making the case to the mainstream resistant people, they want evidence, so let's give it to them.
Speaking of evidence, you actually have some outstanding evidence, and this tree growth, you can't explain it by any factors, no natural factors except the fact that this was affected by some unknown force. In your book, you chronicle other pieces of evidence. What else would you tie into your case?
Well, another of the researchers here just this last year came up with the Scotch pines growing in the vicinity of the Chernobyl nuclear accident exhibited 3 times the normal growth rate that they had. So that ties in with the Geiger counter readings that were taken at the site right after it happened.
I've been worried that in the 40s, after Roswell and then other crash and retrievals, that the military and government has been hiding things. But it seems to me that it's possible that corporations may now house alien artifacts and maybe extraterrestrials, alive or dead. Therefore, they don't have to answer to the public anymore. Do you think that might possibly be the case of why it's so far out of reach for us?
Well, some people are of the opinion that there's a certain secret group that knows the whole story and the rest of us are kept in the dark. But although I think that certain corporations, the wealthier, more powerful ones, and the government probably know more than us. They have access to the means of gathering this kind of data. I think that they're reaching for more too, because they don't have the whole picture.
This year marks the 40th anniversary of your events, of what happened in November 5th, 1975. Any special plans for this
Yes,
year?
we're having the 40th anniversary conference. It's called the Skyfire Summit. You can go online to skyfiresummit.com, and the website's already up. Tickets have been selling for over a week, and going to have some interesting guests this time. It's on the anniversary of the incident, November 5th.
And I might say last year, your 39th anniversary, during your Skywatch, someone actually captured something amazing at the film. Do you think that the reason why, I mean, this is again pure speculation, the reason why this craft was in Snowflake, is there something natural that's emanating from there, maybe more magnetism or anything along the lines of that, ley lines?
We're still working on a lot of the research. We've done some survey maps looking at mineral deposits, thermal, hot water, underground springs, a variety of different things, but nothing real solid. You know, I speculated that maybe they were doing some kind of agricultural experiment on the site, and we just stumbled upon that, rather than it being some accidental effect from their presence. But whatever the case is, we're still looking into it, and we're still, gaining more information at this late date.
Going back to the late 70s and early 80s, one person who came to investigate was none other than Philip Klass. Let's briefly talk about what he did and what he tried to bribe you with.
Well, he went to the youngest guy on the crew, and this is various quotations coming from the FBI file on this UFO debunker. And the FBI had a very low opinion of this guy. Klass is well known to us, deficient on all points of his argument. This is the FBI talking, particularly concerning the credentials of Dr. Hynek, which scarcely could be better. On the other hand, he has no such sterling reputation and has twice been under FBI investigation in connection with the unauthorized publication of classified information. And his previous communications generally have been accusatory or argumentative in nature. And this is a good one. Newark suggests a reading of the letter indicates writer is most likely not in full possession of his faculties. So these final comments here are basically saying that they decided not to prosecute him for his security breach, but turned the matter over to the Central Intelligence Agency. We have here a memo from J. Edgar Hoover, signed by him, to the Director of Security at the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, to have something prosecutable to hang over somebody's head is a very common recruitment tactic for the CIA and gives them the power to sort of direct their activities. I don't think that they turned him into a skeptic, but he could have easily become a tool with this passing of the case from the FBI to the CIA. And this is during a time when, pre-9/11, when the CIA and the FBI were highly criticized for not communicating or working together on things. So that was very interesting stuff from the Freedom of Information Act.
Let's talk about the bribe he tried to get.
Yeah, he sent by way of a local deputy. So that's documented that Deputy Jim Click took a bribe offer to Steve Pierce, the youngest man on the crew, offering him $10,000 to discredit the case, and even had him running around trying to, come up with some sort of story to earn this $10,000, which was never collected because the story was real. And this bribe was repeated and revived at later times. Steve changed his name and moved out of state, but yet somehow Class tracked him down, took him to dinner, and again tried to get him to accept the $10,000. And I put this in my first book in 1977, and had this not been true, it would have been an easy thing for Class to go to Deputy Click and say, "I never sent that offer with you, did I?" No such statement ever came forth because the bribe offer was real. And I talked to Deputy Click's son at the post office here this last year, and he has vivid recollections of those times.
If you were the one person that had the ability to disclose everything to the world, how would you handle it?
Well, I don't know that I would necessarily blow it off, because I really do think that maybe the aliens and perhaps even the government might not be so far off base in not hitting us with the full package all at once. I think it would be very disruptive. So this gradual leaking, here some deputy Russian prime minister makes comments on camera. Panetta said something here recently. Obama even made some comments on the Jimmy Kimmel show. This kinds of stuff is just kind of testing the waters. They're trial balloons. It's got to be incremental, it's got to be gradual, or it's going to be destructive. So, although I applaud the intentions of the disclosure people, I'm a little bit skeptical that they're ever going to say, okay, here it is, here's the whole package, we've been lying to you for years, but here's the truth. It's not in their best interest to do that, even if they wanted to.
Travis, as always, it's been a fascinating time to talk to you. And I want to ask you if you have one final message to give everybody out there in the audience and people who are going to watch this stream afterwards, believers, non-believers alike, people who have been taken, others who haven't. What would you have to say to everybody?
I would just say keep an open mind and base whatever you judge on the basis of the facts. And don't judge the entire phenomenon by any one case. You've got to look at the totality. And it's not all true. Sometimes it's meteors, sometimes it's satellites or airplanes, But there's a very real phenomenon here, and people need to wake up and come to terms with this. And like I said, I don't like the term paranormal, because this is real, and that makes it normal.
Travis Walton, everybody. Thank you. We want to thank Travis Walton, everybody, and stay tuned. In a brief minute, we will have Debbie Jordan Cobble. Very rare experience. I hope you're all excited as I am.